Let's turn now to Shaun Woodward, the former Northern Ireland Secretary under Gordon Brown, for what has been an interesting week. Shaun, I know that you talk to senior figures in and around the Labour Party leadership, and the Labour Party does seem to be rather ahead in the polls. 2 extraordinary by-election wins in the last week. Is this a sign of things to come? Are we heading for a 1997-style Labour landslide?
Really good question, Tom, and good morning to you. I think everybody needs to remember that we're probably a good year out from a general election happening, and I've been around for long enough to know that in a year things can change quite dramatically. But I think what happened this week in those 2 by-elections, where majorities of 19,000 and 24,000 were overturned, is that probably if we're standing back and looking at things and saying what's likely to happen, I don't think this is any longer looking like the 1992 election when John Major was up against Neil Kinnock. Nobody quite knew who was going to win, and John Major just managed to squeak back in, and I actually ran that general election campaign for him. So I have a pretty much kind of good eye on that one. I think this is looking like 97. Something here is happening. And listening to your People's panel just then, people are giving up on the Conservative Party in government. And listening to the gentleman who your reporter was interviewing in the cafe, his remarks, he thought that the party was going to get trounced. And I have to say, with huge respect to people who will be looking at this and trying to find a reason to justify how Rishi can manage it, it's looking very hard to me for him to win this election.
I suppose it is a difficult position for the government to be in, but Sir Keir Starmer has perhaps been a lucky general in the last 2 years. His opponents have run into big problems, whether it's the SNP and their internal turmoil, or indeed the Conservative Party and their civil war. Has the Labour Party done enough to distinguish Sir Keir Starmer, to bring about positive votes for the Labour Party? Or is this just Sir Keir winning by default?
Look, good question, Tom. But I mean, you are a seasoned political analyst here. And I think what you and I would be saying to each other is that basically in a general election, governments lose elections, oppositions never win them. It's a question of how badly the government loses and therefore how well the opposition wins. Now, an opposition can contribute to its defeat, and I would say that Jeremy Corbyn frightened people at the last general election, so Boris Johnson did even better than people were expecting him to do. But what's happened now is that the cost of living crisis that, again, your panel referred to, the problems that people are seeing in the NHS with 7.5 million people waiting for treatment. People, if they have a cardiac arrest, probably quite unlikely in some parts of the country to have an ambulance in time before they die. These things are contributing to a sense that the government doesn't have answers. And I think what that means is that you're seeing, just like your People's panel, people talking about a cliff edge if they're a swing voter. But that's an interesting phrase, isn't it? A cliff edge isn't like nearly there. It's a massive jump. And I think what we're probably going to see is a victory for Keir Starmer that is very big. But it will also be because the country's given up on 13 years of a Conservative Party, which they think is economically bankrupt.
And yet some big problems for a Labour government if it were to take office. It says it would stick more or less to Tory spending limits. The big plan that Labour has for the NHS is to spend a whole 0.5% more on its budget. That's not going to fix the waiting lists. Is the Labour Party setting itself up for just as unsuccessful, arguably, a period of government giving these enormous international headwinds?
No, I think what the Labour Party is rightly doing is ensuring that you don't frighten people. Because most people are pretty intelligent out there. I mean, when I used to be the boss of That's Life programme with Esther Ramson, Esther always used to say, assume that most people are incredibly smart and bright. They just don't have the information. So the information that the Labour Party is giving people is, look, it's going to take a long time to fix these problems. There's no sudden large amount of money to do it. We need to change some of our goals. We need, for example, to move the NHS from something that's constantly trying to fix people to trying to prevent them becoming ill in the first place. So doing cancer scans on people at an early stage rather than waiting for them to have stage 4 metastatic cancer.
Now,
and that's
sorry,
a very
I'm just
expensive thing to
butt
treat.
in here because we are short on time, and I don't want to miss your view on this next very important subject, which is, of course, the situation in the Middle East. You were Northern Ireland Secretary, overseeing the peace process in a difficult and previously war-torn part of this country. What's your view on how there could possibly be peace now between Israel and Palestine?
Well, I always travel in hope, Tom. I mean, I think if we travel only in despair, then we have a danger of fulfilling the worst of our imaginations. And ultimately, the fact that the rest of the world wants to engage in the problems of the Middle East is the best sign of hope, because they don't have a solution that works there right now, because the situation both in Israel and in Gaza is so catastrophic. It's catastrophic for all of those families. Whether you're a mum in Jerusalem or a mum in Gaza, you are terrified for what's happening to your family. But, and I think this is a big but, the fact that we've seen the President of the United States fly in, the fact that we're seeing the involvement of Saudi Arabia, Middle Eastern countries, the fact that we're seeing European countries coming in to want to help, ultimately is a sign of hope. Because ultimately, as we found in Northern Ireland, most people living in Gaza, living in Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, don't want this. And so long as most people don't want this, there's hope for a resolution. But it won't be tomorrow morning.
On that sign of hope, Shaun Woodward, former Northern Ireland Secretary, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much, though, for your views and perspective. Now,